This is Project Management Paradise. This episode of the Project Management Paradise podcast is part of a unique limited series called Unlocking Project Success with Professor John McGrath.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast, your passport to project success. I'm John McGrath, your host, and our guest for this episode is Paul Gill from PayPal. Paul is a program manager and he's been with the company over 8 years. Paul, you're very welcome. Could you begin, Paul, by telling us a little bit about your project management PMO journey today, please?
Cheers. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I started working for PayPal in 2015 as something a little bit different from the project management realm. I came in as a workforce management analyst, but after a couple of years doing that, I progressed to a business enablement role where I helped manage the PMO for a department inside of the company. So that was my first kind of, I suppose, taste of project management as such. More recently, I've spent time as part of our service and strategy and transformation office, specifically working on strategic projects and pilots within the company. And very recently, I've just moved to a program management role within business operations in the company.
Okay, so that's very interesting. The journey really from, I suppose, project to strategy, PMO, and I think that's probably a real big advantage to the organization because, as we know, organizations are very good at strategic intent, very weak at strategic execution. So it's very good to see somebody who has sat at the strategy table who recognizes good ideas require good execution. So that's quite interesting, which probably leads us to our topic that we're going to discuss, which is around cross-functional teams. So I think everyone gets the idea that we need cross-functional teams, but I think you offer a different insight, Paul, in that you see it really as a competitive advantage. The idea that bringing diversity from different departments, different parts of the business together adds something more magic than having a dedicated project team as such, that the fact that they have a foot in each camp of the business means that they bring something more to the table. So I suppose with that in mind, what's your view in terms of, or your definition of a project team in terms of a cross-functional project team? And I suppose too, why are they so crucial in the world of work today?
Yeah, well put. Thanks for that, John. Yeah, so I suppose that the old definitions, a cross-functional project team, in my own words, would be a team of or group of, I suppose, individuals from different functional areas or departments, SMEs as such, that basically would come together and work on the project and work towards that end goal or objective. If you think about like traditional project teams, you may have like a number of individuals from a set department or whatnot. So straight away, you're getting a team full of SMEs as opposed to just general, probably project managers, project analysts, etc. I think that cross-functional teams in today's project management environment are probably nearly a must, really, when you think about it. Especially when you think about technology or fintech companies, especially I can speak to. You've got to be, I believe, agile in your approach today. Look, you only have to look past the recent pandemic and other factors where project teams may have to be agile in their approach and to pivot quickly. And I do think with the cross-functional teams, it allows you to do that. For instance, I suppose in my eyes, the biggest pro for a cross-functional team would be that. How would I put this now? If you have the strategy, okay, and if you have let's just think about the project. If you have the main goal and the main objective, right, of that actual project, and the strategy has not yet been defined, with a cross-functional team, so long as the team know the end goal of the project and everyone's aligned and everyone knows their measurements of success, it allows you to be truly agile in that project. So if you think about it, you have teams or you have SMEs from different areas within the business, and they're all absolute experts in their field. They will often have maybe better ideas or insights than what a traditional project manager would have to allow you to get things done maybe quicker and more cheaper on budget. Um, they have a lot of great insights that the traditional PM wouldn't have. So that allows you to obviously pivot from the plan slightly, but not lose sight of the end goal and the objective. And I think for me that's been a real it's been a game changer, to be honest with you. And I'm starting to really leverage that a lot more in my projects.
I would be of a similar mindset. It's interesting when you talk about being more agile. I think that means different things to different organizations and even different people within the organization. I'm slightly concerned maybe we overuse the word agile, but like we used to do with the word strategy before.
Yeah.
And adaptive is a word I'm trying to use more instead of agile. And I think we kind of need to recognize, where agile has come from. So agile started in software development. It's moved into project management. It's now moved into, I suppose actually, if you look at the full journey of agile, it went from software development, agile project management, and now we're in the era of agile organizations. So agile or agility is something HR aspire for, strategy aspires for, PMOs aspire for. But in terms of being agile, what's your kind of take on it if you were to try and define agile?
Yeah, great question. For me, agile, it's showing agility and the ability to pivot quickly against unknowns. But I think I really like that word that you used there, John. Adaptability. I think that's kind of, I suppose, universal, and it can be used right across the board. It's being flexible. Away from the traditional rigid approaches. I think being agile is an absolute must in today's environment. But yeah, I think, as you said, it can be interpreted many different ways. And like I said, I really like the adaptability term you've used there.
And the other thing too is, I think that there's definitely an education journey that senior leadership teams have to go on, because I've often seen it where somebody sees a Kanban board and they use that now instead of a Gantt chart. So 5 minutes later, they declare the organization has become agile because somebody's using a very simple agile tool. And I think I've certainly seen different kind of theories on agility, but the idea that it starts with a tool, but the destination is a mindset, that the mindset is really what it's about. And that's a way of thinking about a manager recognizing their role is to empower people, having service level agreements around decision making, encouraging people to take a risk. When people take a risk, do amazing work, but get it wrong, that they're fully nurtured and supported. So I think that's definitely kind of up there in the space of agility. I think though, and this is something, I think agility is the end destination. It's somewhere you aspire to get to. Maybe it's a journey that never ends. But I have to say, I think it's a bit like planting a tree. If you want to swing off it, it's going to take years for those branches to get strong. And I think it's actually underpinned by your culture. So you got to invest in culture. You don't really invest in agility. You invest in culture, and culture develops agility. And I don't know and it's certainly going to take several months, and probably realistically for a larger organization, it's going to take several years. So, it may take 5 years in a large organization where you've got thousands of staff to develop any sense of agility or empowerment of people. And that's a big ask, I think, asking people to, plant this twig today, nurture it, water it, feed it, support it, give it a budget, invest in it, and 5 years down the road, you'll start to see fruit. I think strategy is so fast nowadays. That's very hard, and it's very easy for us to be critical of senior executive teams, but they've got to make decisions very often in terms of next year's results, in terms of paying bills. They may tell you that investing in agility is a luxury they don't have in the current economic climate. So I think it's really hard. I do love the idea, though, that maybe you have to start with a team. So and if you think about it, you can't boil the ocean.
Yeah.
You can develop agility in your cross-functional team. So rather than sort of find for reasons to despair, I think we need to look for reasons to be hopeful. And I think that's exactly what you're bringing to the table today.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, John, when you said, when you mentioned about culture. I think I've been lucky enough to work for a company that's big on culture, and I think they foster a sense of collaborativity. I think, so that I think will foster agility, and it helps it grow. And I think that's a big thing.
Okay. And in terms then, the assembling of a cross-functional team. So I certainly know from my own PM experiences, sometimes you're given a team or you become part of a team and somebody decides for you. I get there's a need to do that, but I certainly think if you can sort of select your team, it certainly works a lot better. Any tips you have on, sort of building the right raw material and developing a cross-functional team? How do you select? How do you assemble? How do you form that team?
That's a great question, John. I think from my own perspective, I've obviously been working with the company for a long time, so I've managed to build up a strong rapport with many people across the business and key stakeholders. But I think if you know the end goal and the objective of the project, and you have your measurements of success, you know how to measure that. I think it's not too difficult. Again, I think if you have relationships with these people or different teams, it'll be a lot easier. But maybe you could lean on someone who has that experience, maybe your manager, or maybe a colleague who can help you and say, look, who's here, who can help me from here, who can help me from there, and you'll always find them people that know the business inside out. But I think you just need to just make sure that you account for every part of your project. So, for instance, you've got to have a data guy on your team. Okay. He'll help you with the measurements of success. That'll stop you reaching out to your BI team and having to go with your begging bowl and asking, would you maybe build me a report, or will you be able to give me this? So he can have that covered, and you have it in-house, which is brilliant. And then, there can be so many other areas as well, content, routing, IVR, whatever kind of product
I like the
is
idea
involved.
of that. Your guys, you could almost develop a team model: data guy, pacifier, the communications guy, the strategy, the positive, the warrior. So I do like the idea of that.
It also good for introducing increased accountability across the team as well, John. And I think one of the things that we can't really lose sight of with cross-functional teams is that it is a bit of a double-edged sword as well, right? Because you, as the project manager, will have your key interests are the key objectives, the main objectives, the goals of the end result of the project. However, when you do have these certain individuals from different teams across the business, you can't fool yourself. They do have their team's best interests at heart. So you've got to be conscious of that, but also in terms of increased accountability, they will be accountable for their area. They'll have their area's interests at heart. So that can often help from being an agile perspective, from the strategy. They'll often have better ideas and allow you to, like I mentioned earlier, to get it done quicker or on budget, etc. But you've also got to be conscious of their own interests for their own teams and make sure that doesn't impact the overall main objective and goals of the project, because you could quickly go out of scope, or it may impact it negatively.
Okay. And you just something there when you're forming teams. Sometimes I use a Belbin assessment, and the whole idea is trying to. I often describe it as, kind of lifting the bonnet or seeing the wiring of people in terms of how people are. So I know I score high on resource investigator and specialist, and score lowest on completer finisher. Do you do anything like that in terms of kind of profiling of teams or anything like that? I know a lot of companies don't do it. It's just Belbin is one I particularly found useful.
I've done developing before, John. It's a great tool to use in these instances. Personally, I haven't. And again, it's just down to my tenure probably in the company. But
Yeah,
I think every project manager has their own puts their own twist on things, and that's
yes,
the beauty of working in
yeah,
in a company like I do. You do have that flexibility. There's no rigid process or anything in place, which is great. But I think it's really important that you know your characters. There's no point bringing um an introverted person into the team. An introvert that's maybe gonna have to be speaking on calls 2 or 3 times a week, may have to give updates to leadership, etc. So you want to know your team straight away, um, before you kind of kick off your project. And sometimes that may not be possible, but that's definitely something that you should do in your preparation, I think, in my own perspective.
yeah. I think too that when you're forming teams, like it's not just forming them. I think it's nurturing. So like I put a lot of time into I suppose, both the team selection and project selection if I can, but certainly if I'm given the team, I work with it. Um, One thing I certainly need to improve on more is sort of celebrating success or celebrating failure. And probably it sounds to me you're putting more effort into the ongoing journey, where I'm putting more effort into you know the where we leave from the sort of the journey start point. And I think it's interesting because when I'm listening to you, I think I need to do more on the journey. And I think when you're listening to me, you're kind of thinking about and I think that's the whole idea is when you recognize there's continuous improvement always needed in a team. I think that's really good. So, and if anyone's listening to this and they're wondering, they're thinking the same, I think once you're conscious, you can do more and you should do more with a team. You're probably doing a reasonable job. It's people who think they have it all figured out in teams that would be my worry. I think there's a bit of in project management. It certainly makes us humble. Failure makes us sort of hold our head in shame sometimes. So I think there's a humility in project teams that may not be in other teams where we recognize that a little bit more. That you do have to kind of pick yourself back up, lick your wounds, and sort of get back into the battle again. And I think in other parts of the business, certainly operations or business as usual, where they have teams, they don't encounter the same level of chaos or failure. So I think it's a little bit different. And I've seen it as well in if you work in an area, say, for example, construction, where you can get killed in your going to work. It's highly unlikely as a software developer you'll get killed in your daily work. But in teams where there is a risk to people's safety, like that, I think they actually form much better. A bit like going to war. Soldiers, for example, would probably have far greater team dynamic than office workers because it's that important looking after each other, etc. And I think certainly the construction sector and maybe engineering as well, but certainly IT and maybe even if in a corporate office, I think we got to work harder at the real teams beyond the corporate. The idea that, but like arguing with your family can be pretty intense, but everyone gets over it super quick. And I think in a construction type environment, when there is a kind of hostility, it can boil up very quickly, but it gets resolved very quickly. And maybe in our teams in the corporate world, we don't let things boil up, so they fester. So I think it's very interesting in terms of when you look almost like when you should kind of maybe recognize in team development, you have to have pressure valves for things to bubble up. And maybe that's the stuff you're doing that I'm not doing, where you're maybe celebrating success. You're doing probably a better job than I might think in terms of enabling the team to have a greater voice, to choose their own journey, etc. So I'm learning loads from this, and I'm thinking, this wasn't my intention when we started the podcast, but certainly I'm thinking about the journey where I'm putting too much, or maybe I need to just match my thinking of the leaving point or the formation of the team to the development of the team. So yeah, it's super interesting. I'm going to move on a little bit, Paul, because you've so many
Yeah.
insights, and I want to try and grab some of them. You talked a little bit about the benefits. You just touched on it, but if there was sort of 3 top benefits you see in a cross-functional team, I know you mentioned a couple of them, but I think the people listening, they want to know, okay, I could run this from my department. Maybe they're an IT department, for example, or an engineering department. They said we could run it here, but from listening to you, you're telling me, I think, that it's better to get the wise counsel of other parts of the business to bring those to the table. So if you were to sort of think about the top three in no particular priority, what would they be in terms of that dynamic cross-functional team?
I would say the first and probably most important thing, John, would be the diverse expertise. So again, and I touched on it earlier on the podcast, the project managers are never really SMEs, are they? Well, sometimes they can be, but more times than not, they're the jack of all trades, master of none. So they'll know a little bit about everything. But I find when you have a cross-functional team, these SMEs from different departments and stuff like that, it just brings a whole different dynamic to the team, and it just increases the project manager's expertise as well. Like you're going to be a sponge. You're picking all this stuff up all the time as well. So you're not just, by the end of it, you're probably going to be more like a technical project manager than a project manager, which I find interesting. It allows for faster decision making. Okay,
Okay.
so we're going back to that agile kind of perspective. Okay, so you got to make a decision on the call. You need the data. You have the data guy there on the call. He pulls it up straight away. Or you've got all the people that you need on this cross-functional team. You don't have to stop the call and reach out to Billy to ask him, can we go ahead and do this? Generally the people on the cross-functional team as well will be people that can make a decision on the call. Okay, so you don't want say an employee like probably a entry level employee on a cross functional team. It would probably be someone maybe manager or above level, someone that has the weight behind them and is able to make the decisions on the call. I found that to be very beneficial in the past. If you don't have the right people that can make a decision on the call's a waste of time.
Okay.
In my perspective, that's a really really important one. Um, I touched on it again earlier on, and I know I probably sound like a parrot now, but the increased accountability I think is a big one as well, John. I think team members are accountable for their own areas, but like I said, that is a double-edged sword as well because they'll always have their own interests at heart. So you can't lose sight of your main objective and your end goal. I think.
Yeah. And
Very
probably
important.
one of the maybe invisible benefits as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking of you will naturally have better communication with stakeholder groups by just having a
Exactly.
cross-functional team. It's something, it just will probably happen organically as opposed to when you have everyone in the one department, you're having to have town halls or send out email updates, etc. So there will be a natural kind of organic communication across the organization, and hopefully that's all positive. So yeah, so that I like what you're saying, and I'm certainly learning from what you're saying. One thing that strikes me though, if you have these sort of, let's say, powerful personalities, more senior people in a cross-functional team, there will be a difference of opinion. So there will be conflict as well, and conflict is good, as we know in the project
Yeah.
management space.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with conflict or any problems when they arise, when you've got these big personalities and maybe competing stakeholders? How do you deal with that?
I think I would put that down. You'll always have strong personalities, but I think on a cross-functional team on these calls, this kind of conversation is good, right? You don't want it rearing its ugly head towards near the end of a project or when a project is done. This is why you're bringing these people onto the team. So I would encourage that conversation and kind of arguments. But one thing I would say is that you would probably need, when you're thinking about cross-functional teams as opposed to traditional project teams, you probably need a stronger PM, as in that someone that's probably just been in the role for a little bit longer, has that experience, is able to manage these strong personalities. I wouldn't say it's really for a greenhorn or someone starting off. You've got to bring that sense of governance and structure and strength into the team, I think, and more so like project management leadership capabilities. Um, you're a facilitator as well, more than anything, right? But you've got to keep them on track as well at the same time. So I do think it's a PM with a little bit more tenure is probably more suited to the cross-functional team. That's just my own perspective,
Yeah.
but just yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm getting that, and I'm thinking almost that maybe with less experienced people in a project team like that, you probably spend the PM spends more time on the technical or maybe the cost management or the schedule management, whatever it's going to be. But it sounds to me that if you get those people, you get that sort of competency, that their experience they're coming to the table. So maybe you have to adopt more a project leadership role than a project management role, that you have to, work with the people. It's almost, I think you've got to maybe, which is what you're saying, being a more experienced person, you have to recognize maybe you need to step back and sort of manage the people, and the kind of the cross-functional is what you manage, as opposed to managing the project perhaps. So that's kind of an interesting way. In that environment, you have the expertise to manage the project. So your job is to manage the people, in essence, the cross-functional nature. So that's kind of an interesting, that you don't manage the project, you manage the cross-functional, and the people then manage the project. That might be a way of looking at it, which I definitely think is a distinction between management and leadership in the project space.
Yeah, and even when you think back at like the traditional project management methods, I think one of the most important meetings you'll ever have, and for these types of projects, is the kickoff meeting, right? To ensure that your cross-functional team, that's the easy part, right? They know their roles and responsibilities nearly already, because they're from that area, they're an SME. Maybe their role might change, responsibility might change a little bit, but it's up to the project manager to ensure that everyone is fully aligned. Everyone knows the end goal. Everyone knows what the measurements of success are going to be. And I think when you have that alignment at the start, I think you're less prone to have these kind of difficult conversations, or I suppose conflicting areas of interest as the project goes on.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too, again, I always like to feed off the guests and try and sort of learn and sort of reflect on what you're saying. So it also sounds to me that something we probably should do better, which is a kind of reasonably recent concept in PM, and sort of, I think PMBOK 6 brought it out, was the idea of that you have a team charter, you invest in the team more. So maybe, as well as having a weekly project update or a monthly project update, that you actually have a meeting where you focus on the internals, the team dynamics. That might be something. I'm just thinking maybe you need to, it's like having you just have to invest in that. So you start off with the kickoff meeting, and there's a big effort into developing the project documents, the stakeholder engagement, getting the team. But perhaps when work goes on and you're in execution, that team dynamic is lacking, just like we do with stakeholders. So I'm a firm believer in, I've yet to see a project that doesn't drop the ball to some extent on stakeholder engagement when they hit execution, because the pressure is on. So I think that's probably, and again, I'm kind of thinking back to what you said in terms of being more experienced, to recognize, while you are on massive pressure in terms of project execution, maybe you have to keep an eye on the prize and say that execution only happens if we invest in the people, that dynamic cross-functional project team. So you've got to put time and effort into that as well. I don't think we do that in project management. We're always worried about the external stakeholders and them being happy, but we don't really sit down and say, is the project team happy? I would say it's 1 in 100. It's always about external stakeholders or the business, but we never think about our internal, the people who are going to make this happen, the project team. Any thoughts on that? I certainly have to say I've never done that until conflict arises, and essentially then I've dropped the ball. I mean, it's too late if you're asking that question at that stage. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think with everyone on the team and a cross-functional team, more times than not, they are key stakeholders, because the project is likely going to impact their areas. They're gonna have a big part to say in that. But I would agree with you. But the only thing I would say, John, is that, and I can't speak for everyone, but for everyone's organization, but I know time is precious to everyone. There's a lot of calls, and that's why I really like the beauty of the cross-functional team, because I think that your calls can easily pivot into working calls. So your weekly project status call can actually turn into a working call. And that's kind of the beauty that I like about it, as opposed to like just project status, just give your update. You're actually on the call. you're actually actively working on the project. You could be doing a whole number of things, but everyone is kind of, I find on these calls, is kind of working together as opposed to just giving an update.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So that kind of leads on to the idea then, in that environment, how do you measure progress in that? So if you're in that environment, in a
Mm,
cross-functional team, do we look at progress measurements
yeah.
slightly different, or is it the exact same? Or
I think it's the same. This has to be agreed, outlined at near the start. What are the measurements of success going to be? I think that's a big thing. You'd be surprised in
yeah,
the amount of projects that we've been in, and people aren't really measuring that. And I think you've got to have the data, you've got to have the numbers. Um, everyone's got to agree on what the metrics are, but you absolutely have to have a measurement of success, because if you don't, how do you know if the project is successful or not? It could just be a waste of time, right? So, and also that's what your leadership team is going to want as well, right? When you're at your steer codes or your MBRs, you've got to have some like really clear data and measurements of success. I think so. It's a must that you have your reporting and all in track, in sync.
yeah. And as I listen to you again, Paul, I'm thinking, you're talking about performance metrics of the project, etc. But I wonder, and this is something I'm sure there is out there, but it's not something I'm familiar with, and it may be unique to each organization or each
Mm,
project team. But I wonder if you were to identify metrics in terms of the team performance, as in the
mm,
team collaboration, what those metrics are. That would be quite interesting. So, and the question is, does
mm,
a team who scores high on the KPIs of team dynamics, are they more successful in project execution and the KPIs of the project? My gut feeling it is that they are, but I think
hmm
there's a balance to be set as well. But I think that's an interesting one to look at. It may be a research topic for some future MSc project management student, but the idea of recognizing that there are team metrics as well as project metrics. So, you gotta, and it comes back to the idea, if you want a successful project, you got to invest in people and, cross-functional teams. So have you come across anything like that in terms of the metrics around team performance? I'm sure there's lots
mm.
out, but nothing jumps to mind at the moment.
This is something that I've actually often thought about, John, and I think I won't be we won't be the only first people to think about it as well. I think that's a very interesting topic. I don't have anything like that I'd probably share today. The only thing that I could measure them on is I measure on two things. I measure on the individual's attendance, so that
Yeah.
if you don't, you've got to show up to make a difference, and then also their involvement and then their impact and what they're actually getting done. I think they're two very simple things, but they're the two things that I measure on. If you have someone on your team that's not showing up, or they're joining calls and they're not giving anything, they shouldn't be there, really, in my opinion. But yeah, as far as like KPIs and metrics, it's a really interesting one. I don't
Mm.
know if there's anything that kind of
Yeah.
quantifiable as
Yeah.
such, but
And the reality is, I'm sure, is there's 100 things in theory, but as you know, my view is we can't see evidence of theory being used in
yeah,
practice. It's really daydreaming. So I'm sure there are lots of sort of models out there in terms of academic theory, business theory on how you. But I'm always interested in how does it perform when rubber meets the road, and
yeah.
that's the kind of the metric on it. Very interesting discussion, Paul. Any kind of final concluding for people looking at maybe starting out putting a team together? Is there, kind of a do or a don't that you would sort of say to people in terms of when you are, maybe assembling and leading a
Mm.
project team? If there was any nuggets of advice, what would they be?
Yeah, I think it's down to really your organization that you're in. If you're in an organization that's fostering like collaboration, your areas. I think a cross-functional team would probably be the way to go. But again, I think it comes wholly down to the organization, I think, as well, and that's what their strategy and their vision is. If they just prefer the traditional project management team, you're probably going to have to go down that route because a lot of the team members just won't be used to this collaborative environment. But I think if you're in a organization that's already fostering this culture and collaborative environment, I think already likely that they're already working on cross-functional projects. I think that's how common it is today. It depends. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hit you with one final question because again, I'm just listening and digesting what you're saying. One thing we didn't speak about was the importance of the project sponsor for, a high-performing project team.
Mm-hmm.
It's something the research tells us it's always in the top 3 causes of project success or failure, being leadership, sponsor engagement. Any thoughts around project sponsorship? Is it different in a cross-functional team or is it the same?
I think it's the same, John, to be honest. I've obviously been involved in the kind of service and strategy side of things, and we would have sat very close to the strategy would still be defined by the sponsor, but you would be a lot closer to it. But I think the fundamentals there are still the exact same, regardless of if you're sitting close to strategy or not. You still need your updates, and this is why your measurements of success and your reporting is so important as well, because you've got to keep them communicated all along the whole time. You've got to be transparent and you've got to have clear measurables there. So that's super important. It's one of the most important things, is to know your measurements of success and have accessibility to those metrics to keep them informed.
And one thing, as I'm thinking about what you're saying, Paul, is I think probably, like you said, with the experience, being an experienced project manager or maybe being in the business a while, I think if you have a cross-functional team, if you're very new in, it might be difficult because you don't really understand the organization dynamics, even the operating or business model of the organization. So that's probably something whereby if you are very new but very experienced, I think sponsoring a cross-functional team or cross-functional project, I'd imagine you're a little bit out at sea in terms of the organization dynamics, because there's an organization culture as well as a project culture that can drive success. But very, very interesting discussion. Paul, I'd like to thank you for joining me on the Project Management Paradise podcast. This is my last one in the series. So we did 4 and I'm being put into retirement now, which is great. We're coming up to Christmas here. I'm not sure when this will be aired, but thank you so much for joining me. And no doubt I'll see you again, Paul. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, John. And speak to you soon. Thanks a million.
Thanks for listening to the Project Management Paradise podcast at projectmanagementparadise.com.